The parties, the pictures, and now the fallout. A public rift emerging with the Chancellor and mounting Minister as more MPs threatened to call for him to go. Today, former Minister Stephen Hammond said it looked like the end for Boris and that he was considering very carefully whether to send in a letter of no confidence, while Nick Gibb, who's served under 3 separate leaders, wrote a scathing article in The Telegraph saying that Johnson had flagrantly disregarded COVID rules and to restore trust we need to change Prime Ministers. And yesterday, one of the Chancellor's allies and serving Treasury Minister also wrote a press article saying he had told Johnson he was frustrated and let down. There are now at least a dozen letters that have been written to the 1922 committee, with 54 needed to trigger a vote of no confidence after a backlash to revelations of lockdown parties at Number 10. The police are reportedly examining 300 photos, including one said to be inside the Downing Street flat of Johnson with a beer, taken by the official photographer. Today there was growing disquiet amongst senior Tories. One said to me that they were preparing their own letter of no confidence to submit by the end of the week, after consulting with their association. But it's a different picture when you speak to the money men behind the Conservative Party, because they still seem to back the Prime Minister. One explained to me that while Boris Johnson was difficult to handle, he remained a survivor. Boris faithful Nadine Dorries was also defending the Prime Minister as she unveiled the government's online safety bill.
There are 365 MPs, the vast majority of who are out there today in their constituencies, delivering upon the promises they made when they were elected and delivering on behalf of the Prime Minister. Many of them are aware that they owe their seats and their majority, the biggest majority since Margaret Thatcher, to Boris Johnson.
Have you lost faith in the Prime Minister?
Last week, though, 5 of Johnson's closest aides resigned in the space of 24 hours, including his Chief of Staff, Dan Rosenfeld, and his longtime advisor, Munira Mirza, who penned a stinging resignation letter after Johnson wouldn't apologise for claiming that Sir Keir Starmer failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile. On the same day, the Chancellor seemingly rebuked the Prime Minister for those same comments.
You know, being honest, I wouldn't have said it, and I'm glad that the Prime Minister clarified what he meant.
The move triggered headlines about a growing civil war at the heart of government, with unnamed cabinet sources calling for the Chancellor to be sacked for disloyalty. Insiders say Sunak would be the front runner if a leadership campaign happened quickly. But the history books suggest Tory favourites struggle to hold on to the lead.
Well, joining me now is Jill Rutter, who has previously worked for the Number 10 policy unit and is now a policy expert. Where do you work now?
So I work at a thing called UK and Changing Europe at King's College London. I'm also a senior fellow at the Institute for Government.
Good, right, excellent. Now, let's look at the impact of the government's ability to govern on the last week. Consider first the exodus of senior advisors and civil servants. Does it matter?
It does matter because they're key to actually just making the day-to-day operation tick over. So if you haven't got those advisors in place, and they may be hanging on until their successors are appointed, but they're the people who sort of, manage all the paperwork that comes in, manage the Prime Minister's schedules, get him to make decisions and things like that. So if they're there in a slightly sort of lame duck status, if they're there looking for other jobs, wondering what's going to happen to them next, that's not a great state for them to be in. Obviously, the Prime Minister's brought in a new head of the policy unit to replace Munira Mirza. She's a very long-established aide. He's brought in someone that he knows as well, so there may be a bit more continuity then. But other people in the policy unit, we saw someone else leave on Friday. Others who like working with Munira Mirza will be wondering whether they will stay or not. So you'll have quite a lot of people who might be spending a rather lot of time on the phone to people who might offer other job opportunities.
Right. And sort of losing somebody like your Director of Communications basically affects your ability to get the message out, doesn't it?
It does, because it takes time to establish someone who's on your wavelength, got your trust, is across the whole range of briefs. Remember, one of the things about being at Number 10, that daily briefing that we see, that person has to sort of know where all the bodies are buried, where the mines lie, know what the lines are, across the whole range of government activity. Now, he'll have a deputy, so Number 10's not a small operation, so there'll be some people there. But what the Prime Minister has in one stroke, effectively, is removed his top team, and that's really quite difficult. It's a decapitation strategy.
Right, but more broadly, I mean, when you think politically about other cabinet ministers and other government departments looking on at this apparent chaos in Downing Street, does that affect your ability to deliver policy as well?
Yes, it does, because one of the things is all those people who work in Number 10, they only derive their authority across other departments from the power of the Prime Minister. And what you see then is a big shift in the balance from a position where cabinet ministers feel more or less dependent on the Prime Minister. He, after all, has the power to both hire and fire them. You have a sort of quite a big balance back where people will think, well, you know, the Prime Minister is hanging on a bit by a thread. Do we really have to do what these annoying people in Downing Street are trying to tell us to do? It's always quite difficult. It's quite difficult if you're in Downing Street to actually get information out of quite a lot of government departments. The Treasury, that is notoriously quite a tricky relationship to manage, even though it's, you know, between 10 and 11 Downing Street, and it's been through various incarnations when relations have been very good. David Cameron and George Osborne, I think, is the apogee of a really, really good, close working relationship there, to times when it's been extremely tense, sometimes creatively tense, sometimes quite destructively tense, as we saw between Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, one of the things that was one of the factors in her ultimate fall. So you also have the fact that as Prime Minister, you are constantly wondering about what your colleagues are up to. I was in the policy unit under John Major, and I remember once just making a very casual remark to him about, he complimented me on a jacket I was wearing. I said, oh, Michael Portillo said that too. And he immediately turned to me and said, when were you talking to Michael Portillo? Because Michael Portillo was one of his notorious bastards. So, yeah, if even I, as a civil servant there, you know, were deemed to be, why was I talking to someone whose loyalties were under suspicion? You can imagine it's not a very productive atmosphere.
And just in a few seconds, will anyone want to go and work there now?
I think it's a lot of people who might otherwise have thought Number 10 was the best opportunity you get will be thinking, do I want to go? Do I want to go now? Do I want to go for this Prime Minister?
Jill Rutter, thank you very much indeed. And just bearing in mind the time of day, I should apologise if the language Jill used, which I think was a quote, was a little fruity for this time of day.